Hello and welcome to the show. This week's Tuner Thursday starts with a Lotus Exige. Now we have had a couple of Exige, in fact the last 2 weeks I think we've had Lotus Exiges in the Tuner Thursday competition. However, this one is very different. The previous two have been fairly similar in the way they've been built. This one, no. Not only does it have rally lights on the front, because, you know, why not? It also has a 572 horsepower V8. That is an awful lot of power in a car that weighs 2,400 pounds. Lots and lots of power in this Exige. 405 torque as well. So we've got, what, 150 more horsepower? Sort of 40 odd more torque, and only weighing a couple of £100 more than the previous Exiges. It is mighty fast in a straight line. We're doing well past 165 miles an hour by the time we jump on the brakes down here, and it's the acceleration in between the corners as well that really does impress with this car. One sudden word of warning with the driving of this vehicle: you've got to be wary of the brakes. It is a good car under braking. It does get stopped very well, but it is so very, very fast in between the turns that you do have to brake a little bit earlier than perhaps you were expecting. I mean, it's about the 500 board into turn one, but certainly these corners that we're coming up to, I did find myself out braking a little bit, certainly on the first few laps, out braking myself just a little bit too much, because I was expecting, you know, it's a Lotus to be able to brake pretty late. You just can't, because you are going so quickly when it comes to the corners. Now, you may be wondering how on earth this car got so much more power without a huge amount more weight and still kept it in A class. Of course, there are going to have to be compromises made, and the compromise is tyres. I'm not sure what grade of tyres this car is running. It is certainly not race tyres. When you look at it in Forza Vista, I can see the tread on the tyres. I don't know. I don't know what it could well be running street tyres, because that is a lot of power in an Exige. It already starts off, I think it's right at the top of B class. So to have all of this power, sort of power parts in the car, to have to swap the engine to the, I think it's the Ferrari 458 V8 that's in this one. Yeah, it's not got the tyre quality, if you like, of the other vehicles. However, amazingly, it's not really that affected by it. Certainly driving the car, it doesn't feel like you're running on crappy tyres. I have to say, real credit to the tune on this car. The Exige from standard can be a bit twitchy, it can be a bit awkward. As I said before, we raced an Exige against a Camaro around Long Beach. Both of the cars standard, both similar PIs. The Camaro beat the Exige because it was just easier to drive. The Lotus, while yes it is quick through the turns, it's a standard spec we're talking here, can be very twitchy, can be quite uncooperative. When you put 572 horsepower in a car like this with not the best tyres, I was expecting it to be an absolute handful, and it just wasn't. It was, yes, it was a bit oversteery. At times, when you push the car very hard, it would slide around, but it wasn't twitchy. If it did start to slide, I could gather it back up before it span around in a circle. I did spin it once, but that was due to some curb usage. It's not a good idea. And a car this small and light and powerful, you don't really want to be going anywhere near the curbs. But aside from that, it was remarkably well behaved around the course. Not at all what I expected from an incredibly powerful Lotus. Our next vehicle comes from Roadrunner 727 with a Jaguar E-Type. We've got another British car for you today. This one in particular has the V12 engine from a Ferrari Enzo. So we have a lot of power here. 676 horsepower, 503 torque, and the car weighs a mere 2,300 pounds. That is a massive, massive power to weight ratio in a car, and as you would expect, straight line speed pretty damn good. Again, we're past the 165 mile an hour mark as we come down this sort of front straight. This car, like having that much power in this vehicle, I was sure that it wasn't going to be running on race tyres, but nope, you can keep this car with race tyres and keep all of the PI in A class. It's also got huge tyre width. I found out when I did a silly car build with the Jaguar E-Type, because of the monster tyres that you can get on the vehicle, even when it went up to sort of 1,200 horsepower, the vehicle was pretty damn good on traction, and certainly the E-Type is perhaps one of the most impressive cars that I have driven in this series, because despite all of the power and none of the weight, and the fact that it is, let's face it, a rather old chassis, the E-Type is absolutely fantastic to drive. This is a really very very, very good car. There is very little in the way of oversteer. The car doesn't particularly slide around, but that hasn't come at the cost of turning into the corner. There isn't particular understeer either with this vehicle. It handles incredibly well. I don't know how on earth they have made this car as good as it is. There is a slight downside to the handling, as we saw there. This car loathes curbs. It cannot deal with the curbs on the inside of the corners. Now, because the car is such a good handling vehicle, especially on that final section, I often found myself taking slightly tighter line through there than I could get away with in some other vehicles. That often meant I would slightly brush the curbs on the inside. Now, a lot of cars can get away with a small brush on the curb. Yes, if you hit them very hard, it'll cause problems, but a lot of cars can get away with small brushes on the curbs. This can't. You cannot go near the curves because it will throw it up onto two wheels. You've got to be really very, very careful. But if you keep off the curbs, then the Jaguar is remarkable how good it is. You can carry huge amounts of speed through the corners. There is loads and loads of grip for go around the corners. You can then put the power down out the other side of the corner, and you don't really have very much problem. For nearly 700 horsepower in this car, it really doesn't slide around that much. I mean, you can be a real proper moron on the throttle. It will slide a little bit, and then it will find grip, and then it will shoot off down the road. It's quite remarkable just how well this car handles all of the power. Again, the brakes are very good on this car. You're going very, very quickly, as I make the same mistake in these final corners. You're going very, very quickly by the time you get to a braking zone. But again, it's around, I think it was a little bit after the 500 board into turn 1 and all the other braking zones. You weren't braking massively earlier because of all the extra speed that you get out of the car. The acceleration in between the turns was outstanding. I was thoroughly impressed with the E-Type. Up next from that opus is a Lexus IS F. To be fair to the Lexus, I did just come from driving a very, very nice handling Jag, and then we come to a rather large four-door saloon car. For the first few laps, this thing felt like an utter boat because it was nowhere near as sharp as the Jaguar, which is a little bit unfair to be comparing this thing to the E-Type, or to going to this thing from the E-Type, because it gains its speed in a slightly different way. This is another very powerful car, and very quick car in a straight line. 569 horsepower, 455 torques, a little bit on the heavier side. It's 3,000 pounds, but it is one of the fastest cars we have had on this series. 168 miles an hour I could get out of this before getting scared and jumping on the brakes. The brakes were not the best in the Lexus. As you can imagine, it is a much bigger, a much heavier car. You've got to be careful, and certainly on the first couple of laps. I may have outbraked myself a little bit into a few of the corners. As, yeah, the brakes are not as sharp as I was used to driving with the Jag and the Lotus. The other sort of main problem with this car was oversteer, especially on the first couple of laps. You can see the car's got no aero parts on it. It slides around quite a lot. Now, after the first couple of laps, it does start getting a bit better. Once you get the tyres warmed up, it isn't too bad. Certainly, the fast kink on the straight, or I think it was up until about lap 4, the Lexus was sideways around it. After lap 4, it was okay. After then, we could take it flat out, and I didn't have a problem with the back end stepping out, but it was the oversteer that was the issue with this car. I mean, it was decent enough through the turns for a big, heavy four-door saloon car. That was a corner that I did struggle with, running a bit wide that time. I think I may have collected the wall slightly. I mean, it's not as sharp through the turns as the Jag. It felt a hell of a lot heavier. It certainly felt like a £3,000 car. I mean, £3,000 isn't terrible, shall we say, on the weight front, but when you're comparing it to 2,300, 2,400 pound sports cars, it does feel quite like a boat. Now, once the tyres had warmed up, things were not too bad with the Lexus. As I said, the straight line speed in this car is quite ridiculous. I'm not sure quite how it was going so fast, considering it was less powerful than the Jag, less torque and weighed more. It just got so much speed. Perhaps the gearing was slightly better in this car, I don't know. It got so much speed down into that first corner. I was quite surprised by that one. And certainly for the first few laps, I was struggling to get any speed out of this vehicle. Once you start taking it a little bit cautiously, once you stop having the car go sideways and you're making sure you get get it stopped in time. It's not too bad. It wasn't doing too badly. Lots of fire. You don't often see fire out of the back of a Lexus, aside from the LFA, which is kind of a bit of an odd one out for Lexus. It's not a very common sight to see fire spewing. And yeah, if you got the brakes sorted, which I still hadn't quite at this point, and got the power delivery sorted on it, it really didn't do too badly. All things considered, I think it's one of the very few four-door cars that we've had in this series. Our final vehicle today comes from OLR Destroyer. It is a Ferrari F40. I'm a very big fan of the F40. This one is a peculiar car to drive. This is perhaps one of the strangest cars I've driven on this series. We'll start with the specifications of the vehicle, if you like. 650 horsepower, 484 torque. So lots of power, decent amount of torque. Again, I believe this is running the 6-litre V12, the same as the Jaguar EType. It's the Enzo engine in this car. So it's plenty powerful enough and incredibly fast in a straight line. Again, this is the first episode we've had all four cars doing 165 miles an hour plus on the way into that first huge braking zone. Very, very quick car in a straight line. It is rather heavy. Amazingly, it is heavier than the Lexus at 3,077 pounds. Now, my guess is that fitting that engine in this car and keeping all of the PI into A-class is a bit difficult. So I doubt there is weight reduction on this car. Because, yeah, heavier than a four-door saloon car. Also, it doesn't have race tyres. Again, not sure quite what grade of tyres it's running, but it's certainly not race tyres. It's the handling, though, that is weird. Now, I've talked about driving styles before. I like to have cars that are planted. I don't want my vehicle to be oversteering at all. It's just the way that I drive a car, the way that I can get lap time out of a vehicle. Now, the trade-off for that is I tend to have a slightly understeering car. Now, that's fine with me. So when I tell you that this car has huge understeer, bear in mind that I kind of slightly like a vehicle to understeer a bit. This is incredibly understeer a vehicle. It took the first few laps I drove with it were atrociously slow while I tried to figure out how to drive this car quickly. It is such a bizarre way that you end up driving this car, because I will be honest, I've probably driven front-wheel drive cars that have less understeer than this thing. It just does not want to get turned into a corner. It really does not want to get turned into anywhere on the track. It is flat out through the fast kink on the straight. It's not quite got as terrible understanding. I had a Fiat 500, sorry, that barely was flat out around around that corner. But no, it will be flat out around that corner, but everywhere else it just doesn't turn in to the corner in a normal manner. You have to drive the car in a lot different way. Once you get your head around it, then you start going quickly, and then you start going really quickly. Once you've got the hang, you've got to get this car stopped really early, get it turned in really early, and then you boot it out the other side, and then you can get some speed out of the Ferrari. It is a very, very fast accelerating car, despite being relatively heavy compared to the likes of the E-Type and the Exige. This is still a mighty fast accelerating car, and because we have got such huge amounts of understeer, we have the planted nature that I like from a car. We don't have oversteer. It doesn't slide around. I mean, yes, if you're an idiot with 650 horsepower, you'll get anything to slide, and certainly out of the hairpin at the end of the lap, yeah, you could get the car sliding, but much like the Jaguar, it didn't like sliding around at the course of the track. It just took a few laps to get the hang of driving this car. An interesting challenge, I have to say, getting the hang of driving something like this. I was amazed how little turning you could get out of a Ferrari F40. But on to the times, and we have a brand new top two. The Jaguar E-Type makes it the first vehicle into the 1-minute 22s with a 1:22.7. In the 9 flying laps that I did, there was only one lap that was slower than a 23.9, and that was a lap that I spun it when I hit a curb. Annoyingly, that was a lap I was going 0.2 quicker as well. There was more speed in that E-Type. It was such a nice car to drive. That is a really, really well-built car. The F40, despite the difficulties I had with the handling and getting used to it, by the end, I got a 23.245 to put it up into second. I was doing 25s and 26s for the first couple of laps. Took a while, but once you get the hang of it, that thing will fly, and I have no doubt it will go quicker than that with more laps. And in 10th, we have the Lotus Exige. So 3 cars in the top 10 with a 24.1. impressive to have got so close to the other Exige that was all a handling car with all that speed. There were, yeah, only 0.1 of a second difference between them. We do have to go further down to find the Lexus IS F 125.895. Not perhaps a track suited to the Lexus. It was a bit big, a bit heavy, or it felt a bit heavy, shall we say, through the corners. It wasn't any heavy, it was lighter than the Ferrari, but it felt heavy through the corners. Didn't quite have the handling, but once you got some warmth in the tyres, it did pretty well. It did better than I expected from the big Lexus. Anyway, that is it for this video, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.